Hey everybody, it's Gary Lucas. Here it's June 18th, Thursday, and this is part 2 of my tribute to the one and only incredible Captain Beefheart, so let's get right down to it. Anyway, a little paraphrase of a track called Sun Zoom Spark, one of the most exciting of all of Beefheart compositions, as an out-and-out rocker with a kind of a cowbell action going on that really drives the track. And anyway, so part 2, I'm going to talk a little bit about this and that, all related to Captain Beefheart. We covered some ground with Trout Mask Replica because part 1 was all about Trout Mask, or at least as much as I could squeeze in the time I do these things. A couple of things to add. I played a solo arrangement of the guitar parts for Sugar and Spikes, one of my favorite tracks, and I should have mentioned that in the middle there's an interpolation of a theme by the Spanish composer Rodrigo, the Concerto de Aranjuez, which was pretty much side 1 of Miles Davis's Sketches of Spain. And again, this was something I asked John about whether he was consciously quoting Miles, and he said, oh yeah. So, it fits into his general pattern of fashioning these songs, treating music as sculpture. I mean, he was essentially a sculptor from the earliest age when he was discovered by another Rodrigo, Agustino Rodrigo. See how everything connects? It's all a beautiful pattern if you connect the dots. So, anyway, that lyric is a description of sort of going out in L.A. And living it up and having a high old time. And part of it, I guess, was listening to Sketches of Spain as the soundtrack to Don's teenage years, because, as I mentioned, he was a huge jazz fan. And I also mentioned, that many black jazz musicians of the Free School came to see his concert, the same concert I was at, which was his debut in New York, 1971, including Mingus, who I guess didn't care for it so much. But who did care for it was former Mingus sideman and an incredible leader in his own right, Rahsaan Roland Kirk. He loved Beefheart. And Dorthan Kirk told John that after he passed, that Rahsaan would wake up in the middle of the night and say, we got to hear this album, and he put on Trout Mask Replica. I got people writing in, commenting about how extreme that music is, and how friends of theirs that they tried to turn on to that album had reacted sometimes negatively, sometimes violently. So I can share one little story. I have a very good friend from college named Ken Hurwitz, and he lives very close by here. And I've worked with him on some of my records because he's also a singer. And he was in a situation whereby he went away to China. He's married to a Chinese woman, Mi Ling Tsui. And when he came back, he found that roommates that he had trusted had brought in friends of theirs and usurped his room in the apartment. And he didn't know how to get rid of these people. So I suggested to him, as a kind of a joke, be careful like what you say, that why didn't he try to blast Trout Mask Replica at about 6 a.m. in the morning at full volume, which he did. And it had the desired effect, and the people freaked out and said, are you crazy? We're going to call the cops. And anyway, by sundown, they were gone. They were gone from that apartment, and he was able to get his room back. So, hence some of the beneficial properties of the Van Vliet oeuvre there manifest right before you now. So I want to give a shout out, because I forgot to do this. I ran out of time, to some of my patrons in the last week or so. Jonathan Luftig, he said, I love the Beefheart Show. Your music has done a lot for me. And he's a multiple contributor. I'm so happy. Michael Lutz, thanks for getting me hooked on I'm Glad. That's also incredible. That's a Skip James tune that was covered by Cream, and one of my favorites. David Stovall, Anthony Tony Ammerman. He sent me money specifically for falafel sandwiches. Okay, well, we'll take the hint, Caroline and I. Maxim Igor Popovich, Fast and Bulbous, he wrote. Yes, I was involved in a Beefheart tribute with Philip Johnston, who leads the Microscopic Septet. We recorded 2 very good, I think excellent albums of instrumental versions of Beefheart music that came out on the Cuneiform label. The first one is called Pork Chop Blue Around the Rind, which was an image extracted from a Van Vliet impromptu poetry session here in my apartment. I think I posted that earlier down the timeline, if you want to check the actual original recording. And the second album we did was called Waxed Oop, An Impetuous Stream Bubbles Up. I have notebooks filled with Don's art, sketches that he made in the book. He would just pick it up at random, and also fantastic poetry and stream of consciousness images. I'll get to that. I'm getting away from myself. Colin John Campbell, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. Nicholas Monin, again. Yasser Tabat, he must be a 3rd or 4th time contributor. He said, can't wait for the Beefheart tribute. Okay, well, here it comes. And there's a part 3 on Saturday at 3. Mark Green, another multiple contributor. Guy Levy, thank you. Most recently, Robin DeMeo. See, the list goes on and on. I'm loaded, man. Mark Young, John Goodman, David Jenkins, Carl Berger, not the Carl Berger who is the improvising musician, but CAR, I think from the UK, Carl Berger. Phil Stutt, a multiple contributor. Hakao Angberg from Scandinavia. Love your sessions and guitar playing. Well, I love to play for you guys. And so back to the front here. I was in a tribute with Denny Wally, John French, and Rockette Morton, and also Michael Traylor and Robert Williams. Great drummer, maybe the most hard-hitting of all the Beefheart drummers. This is a point of contention. I think they're all great. I was in there for a couple of years, and it's called the Magic Band, and toured extensively in the UK a couple of times with them. And some dates in Europe. We got as far as playing in Belgrade, Serbia, an amazing concert there in the old castle, and that was a trip. And I think I'll pick something out of the collection. There's so much I could show you, and here's something that Don inscribed to me in 1975 in his notebook, and I had it laminated. Of course, it's registering backwards. That's what Facebook streaming does. And it's one of his poems that he copied out, and I'll read it. And it says, one nest rules after another. I think he meant rolls. Here he spelled it R-O-O-L-S. Until there are, capital R, no longer any birds. One tongue lashes another. Until there are no longer any words. I love fails no birds. To Gary, love Don Van Vliet. That poem actually was written out on the sleeve of the Mirror Man album. My friend Arthur Levy, for whom I wrote a piece all about Beefheart many years ago in Zoo World magazine, which was trying to be a competitor to Rolling Stone. I did a long review of a live show at Town Hall. He's asked me to do a bibliography, Arthur has, of, I don't know, the whole canon, but that's a lot of albums there. I think there's at least 10 or 11 Beefheart albums. So I might just do a write-up on my favorites, 4 or 5 of them for you. So that's coming. I'm going to watch for that. I'll now play a little more music. Let's bring over the Siège Tournant. I love this round chair, designed by Le Corbusier. And anyway, when Caroline and I got married, I saw this in the restaurant that we had a reception for, and I said, I gotta get one of these. My friend James Marshall requested China Pig. This is on Trout Mask Replica, and it's played by Doug Moon, another unsung genius of the very early Magic Band. He was like, I think, the first guitarist in there with Alex Snauffer. And he appears on this one track on Trout Mask doing an improvised, it sounds like an improvised country blues. I don't know if Don was extemporizing, but he might have been, because on a good day he was just incredible. He was dropping pearls everywhere. He'd look at anything, and I mean, I'll give you an example. I don't want to kill my China Pig. A man's gotta live, a man's gotta eat, a man's gotta have shoes to walk on the street. I don't wanna kill my China Pig. All right, so one little true story. I performed that kind of like that in a club. I had a residency during a couple of years in a club in Taipei, Taiwan, called the Idea House. And one night I just started to play that, not on that guitar. I didn't have that guitar then, but on somebody's guitar. And because there was a language difficulty and maybe perhaps a little barrier here to understanding, one of the patrons, a Chinese person in the bar, got up and made threatening gestures at me and said, "Are you calling Chinese people pigs?" And I had to try and cool him out and explain that actually it was a poetic metaphor for breaking open one's piggy bank. I don't know if you had one. I had one that was in the shape of a globe of the world. The people could fit nickels and dimes in the slot. I used to charge kids to see horror films in my basement when I was a young boy. Yeah, so I don't want to kill my China Pig has nothing to do with Chinese people. And yes, in fact, I'm quite an aficionado of Chinese culture. And anyway, so just goes to show, be careful sometimes what you say, because people take things out of context. And if you're at all ironic or being like sarcastic or funny or nuanced, sometimes the joke is on you. So, yeah, I'm gonna show you another prize out of the collection now, if I don't topple the guitar over in the first place. Okay, let's take a little walk over to the couch now. The reason this couch has this purple blanket on it is because Lulu has destroyed a lot of the cushion underneath it by digging for bones, imaginary bones. And right over here, I don't know if you can see this, but okay. Right over here, in focus, I hope. Anyway, it's in glass. But it's a drawing that Don gave me in 1979. It's maybe one of the best that he did that I've seen, and I was so grateful to be the recipient. There's a lot going on in there, and it's so great that Kurt Loder, my old friend, who was an MTV news, the head of the news department for many years when they first started, he was a senior editor at Rolling Stone and a big Beefheart fan. He invited me to submit it to be photographed, and it ran as a random note, that piece of art, just by itself, with news that we were working on a new album. And I remember going up to their offices and Jan Wenner himself coming out to look at it. And anyway, it's you can look at actually some of my Beefheart art collection online. I've got pretty good scans of a bunch up with all the backstories about the pieces. Just go to GaryLucas.com/www/DVV for Don Van Vliet. And you can see him and read about him. And I think I'll play another tune now on electric guitar. And this is from a later Beefheart album. And this one is called Suction Print. Now, it originally was titled Pompadour. And I first heard it, the band opened with this at Town Hall in 1973. Jim Igo, who does jazz promo services, press releases for me, was there. And there are tapes of that bootleg circulating. It was an incredible show that featured Don with Artie Tripp on drums, Arthur Dyer Tripp, otherwise known as Ed Marimba. He was also known as Artie with the green mustache. And I saw him backstage applying a green crayon to tint his mustache, and he said to me, the fans would be crushed if they knew this wasn't my real green. Anyway, Artie Tripp on percussion. Zoot Rollo, Bill Harkerode, killing it on slide guitar and electric guitar. Alex Snauffer, who goes all the way back to the first album of Beefheart's, Safe as Milk, was in on this tour for a while, and he was playing guitar on the date. And Mark Boston, who otherwise known as Rockhead Morton, was third guitar. I wouldn't say any of them. I mean, like, Zoot was playing the leads mainly, but they were all contributing great lines. So there was a 3-guitar lineup, and Roy Estrada from the Mothers, who at that point had been given the name Orejon, which Don said meant big donkey ears in Spanish. He was playing bass. And this was, to me, I mean, I saw the band play at Ungano's, and that was incredible with John French and Elliot Ingber and the double drums and the marimba. But this was also fantastic. I went there with my friend Bill Mosley, who was my buddy and partner at Yale in the Horror Film Society. Bill is now a very prominent actor in horror films himself. And we had our minds blown that night. And then I went backstage to talk to Don, because at this point I'd gotten very friendly with him. And then I wrote the whole account up. So if you go to beefheart.com, I want to direct you to that website. Big thanks to Steve Froy and Graham and the other people who tend it for keeping the flame alive on Don's work. And I think my article is reprinted there. It may also be on my website somewhere. I don't know. I got a lot of stuff, artifacts. So let's see. Suction Prince, partially Suction Prince, an abridged version, and that was finally recorded in the studio for the album Shiny Beast, which was kind of Don's comeback album, I would say, after two considered disastrous albums on Mercury Records, Unconditionally Guaranteed and Blue Jeans and Moonbeams. The progression of Don's work is very interesting. The first album, Safe as Milk, was so radical in a way and so good, but very accessible and listenable with actual songs, as most people know them as songs. This thing was praised to the skies when it came out in 1966, produced by my friend Fred Perry's brother Richard Perry and Bob Krasnow, who was also managing Don for a moment. And there are pictures of both John Lennon and George Harrison at home with the bumper sticker. There was a bumper sticker that came with the original album with a day glow writing Safe as Milk and a picture of a little baby. Don said the title Safe as Milk was a reference to the strontium 90 count in mother's milk, a reference to the fact that atomic testing had produced visible radiation results in the breast milk of mothers, which was alarming, of course, at the time. At the same time, Don often claimed that the reason he was as creative and unusual as he was because he grew up near where they did atomic bomb testing, kind of at near Edwards Air Force Base in Lancaster. I don't know. I just think he was really one of a kind, diamond in the rough, and certainly the most artistic person I ever met. What else can I tell you? I mean, just off the top of my head, I was talking about Roland Kirk. One of the best stories of Don was how I, got into the band. People want to know. Well, I met him actually after knowing him for some years. I'd met him because he was coming to do a concert up at Yale. And I had seen this debut show in New York at Ungano's, which convinced me that my destiny lay with playing with this guy. I mean, I promised to myself, if I ever do anything in music, I'm going to play with this guy. And then 6 months later, the program director at WYBC FM, Yale's radio station, said, as you're such a big fan, you should interview him. So I have a reel-to-reel tape in my collection. You can hear my voice tremble on it. He's in Boston doing press interviews for the day. They had a day off on this East Coast tour. And he comes on the line, and I'm like, first of all, he'd been on the cover of Rolling Stone at this point. Can you imagine these days anybody at all in the avant-garde sector of things being on the cover of that magazine? Unlikely, but you never know. One hopes. Anyway, so Don put me at ease right away. This big booming voice came over in a very low register. Hello, Gary, how are you? And, he just made me feel good. So we had a relaxed interview and touched on all sorts of things. And I mentioned Fred Perry, and he said, say hello to Richard. Tell him to say hello to his brother. And we talked about a lot of stuff. I'll have to, digitize that and post it, but it was a good one. Then he came up, and I met him right on the day they were the afternoon to do their concert, but they didn't sound check, and it didn't quite come across. There were sound problems, and I don't know, the band wasn't really into it so much, and that was disappointing. But anyway, I went down to see him shortly thereafter in New York, and he was much better, and the band was better, and people loved them. They played twice in that period. The second time, on a bill right in the middle, sandwiched between a young Billy Joel, of all people, opening, just solo piano and songs, and the Jay Giles Band as the headliners. And my friends and I were heckling Billy Joel. I don't know, he was doing impressions, and we were yelling, do Nixon, do Nixon. So, anyway, Don and I stayed friends, and then I saw him every time he played around Manhattan mainly, or New York at Town Hall several times, and went backstage, wrote him up, and then lost touch with him. And then I heard about these Mercury albums, and they just sounded really dismal. I got them, and there was some good songs on there, but like the whole creative thrust seemed to have been dissipated, or he was really going for a more commercial sound. And maybe he was, because he's pictured on the cover of Unconditionally Guaranteed clutching dollar bills in his hand. And it says love over gold on the back, which is sort of contradicts the front. But in any case, as he said once to a heckler, I got a right to win a Grammy. If that's what made him happy, then go for it. But I just sort of kept my distance when the next one came out, Blue Jeans and Moonbeams. And yet there are people, like we were on tour in Australia, Gods and Monsters and myself doing a Tim Buckley tribute. And I was amazed at how many people, including people like Steve Kilbey of The Church, would cite tracks from Blue Jeans and Moonbeams as their favorite Beefheart song. So go figure. The one that they particularly seem to like is called Observatory Crest, by the way. And anyway, I didn't think any more of it, and I thought maybe, Don had his heyday. And I was then in New York in 1976, after a lost year I won't go into here, but I was getting ready to go live and work in Taipei, Taiwan. I was studying Chinese in Syracuse, and I saw in the paper that Captain Beefheart, as special guest to Frank Zappa, was going to make an appearance at the Syracuse War Memorial. So I got my buddy Tom Prouda, who's my Facebook friend, and we went down to see the show. And then Don was looking lost when they were packing up. He was great, by the way, in the show, some of which came out on the Bongo Fury album. And I met Denny Wally there, and we all went out because Don wanted to have ribs. And the rib story is, Don told me that he was with Roland Kirk one night, and Roland was saying, Don, we got to get some ribs. It was midnight. I'm so hungry. Let's go get some barbecued spare ribs. And Don said to Roland, the only place you can get ribs at this point, maybe it was 3 o'clock in the morning, the only place you can get ribs at 3 a.m. is in the Bible. So anyway, we went out. I found this rib joint that was basically operated in a guy's backyard in the ghetto in Syracuse that was like an underground culinary delight. And Tom loved it. And in the middle of our chow down, I said, if you ever put your band together again, I would like a chance to audition. And he said, you mean to say you play the guitar, man? Really? Why didn't you tell me? Like indignant about it or something. And I said, well, honestly, I didn't think I was good enough, because really, in order to play a lot of this music, you have to really be up technically on your game. But you see, I was studying it secretly in my spare time, so I said, I want a shot to audition. He said, okay, bring your guitar up. I'm playing in Boston with Frank on Friday, and I took the Greyhound bus up there. Met him at the stage door. I went with Bill Moseley to the show, and then went back to his hotel and auditioned. And he said, yeah, we got to do something, but he was vague. Anyway, I had a ticket to leave to Taipei 2 weeks later, and that I did, and I had adventures. But when I got back with my new Chinese bride, Ling, in tow, we were trying to get set up in San Francisco, struggling. And I rang him up, and he said, oh, Gary, it's great hearing from you. Well, you got to come and see the band now. I put a band together, and we're playing at the Keystone of Berkeley. So I went there and reinitiated my friendship with Don, and stayed in touch with him after we moved to New York, and stayed in touch for a couple of years while I was working at CBS Records. And finally, in 1980, or maybe right in 79 at the end, he said, okay, I want you to be on the next record, and I'm sending you some music. And that became Flavor Bud Living, a solo guitar piece, which kind of put me on the map as a guitar player. And I see we're running out of time, and so I just wanted to say, I want to thank Paul Burkholst, who's like one of Coda Klute's coterie of people, for this beautiful Beefheart doll. I don't know where he acquired it or who made it, but he gave it to me when the Magic Band played at the Paradiso about 2005 or 2006. Paul came forward with this and down with the top hat and the little goatee and the green fur-lined coat that he's wearing on the cover of Trout Mask. And I got more Beefheart stories and music for you guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. I love playing for you and talking about Captain Beefheart, Don Van Vliet, and the genius and of everybody who worked with Don. Because it ain't easy. It wasn't easy then. It isn't easy to play this music now. And I give everybody who hung in there long enough to play with Don and record with him the biggest of props. And I'll mention more names next week, okay? But love to you guys. Stay safe. The Times today, the New York Times had an article about people in New York just basically fucking off the social distancing and, really, you guys, knock it off. Watch it. It's dangerous. And we're right in the beginning of the first wave. We're not nearly, it's not too early. It's not too late, but it might be too late if you don't social distance. So anyway, you know what I'm saying. See you on Saturday, 3 p.m. Okay, love you guys.